I'm sitting here Googling how many nuclear weapons Russia has and what the US's defense of potential nuclear threats are in our missile defense system and stuff. So, what are you thinking about all this stuff all the craziness that's going on?
I'm old enough to remember when Reagan said 1,000 points of light, maybe it was Bush, and they were talking about a missile defense system way back then. Kind of makes sense now. And I've seen video where the Ukrainian president was offering arms and weapons to any citizen who would stand up and fight. It kind of gives me a whole new respect for our country and what freedom really means and what the Second Amendment really means.
Well, it's a good thing that we have more arms than people in America. So
yeah, 400 million from what I heard.
Right. That's pretty crazy. But, a friend of mine was talking like, well, what do we do? Right. What can the US do? He was like, well, I was like, well, we don't want to go to war with Russia, at least not a real war, not a combat, mano a mano kind of war. Because, we care about our people a lot more than they do. And, when it comes down to it, nobody wins in a nuclear fight. Right. So.
Yeah, certainly. And we don't want complete annihilation. Remember the movie War Games? So,
yeah.
I think personally we've been in a world war for many years, and it's not been with military. I think it's been with, information and technology and things happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a war that goes on, that we don't talk about, right? When, you see China and Russia work synchronously, both shutting down crypto, right? There's, fascinating that both of the largest communist countries in the world, both shut down their cryptocurrencies. It's kind of interesting to watch. But one of the things my friend asked me, he said, well, why do we sell them stuff and give them money and make them money if they're at a Cold War with us? And I told him, I said, I don't know if I really have that answer. So I said, let me ask Kevin tomorrow and see what he thinks. I'm throwing stuff at you right off the bat, bro.
Right off the bat. Well, I started asking myself questions like, well, where does Burisma come into all this? Where does, some backdoor dealings happen to come into play that, now that administrations change every couple of years, of course, we know that, but, is Russia trying to clean up a mess somewhere that we don't know about? Obviously, anytime something happens, there's what you see on the news and there's what's really happening behind closed doors. And obviously what you see on the news is what they want us to see, without becoming too much of a conspiracy theorist.
Well, I mean, I think there's conspiracy theory and there's reality, right? You can play around with conspiracy theory and say, why are the two richest men in the world building their own spaceships, to leave our world? Or you can say, I was saying, if you go back and look, a video, 12 months, 18 months ago, I was definitely saying, I feel like we're at a Cold War, with Russia and China that people don't talk about, or you can call it a digital war. And I feel like, there's a good chance that, Russia will invade more countries. And, the scary thing is if, one of those countries does what they do and then realize they can handle the repercussions, then what do they do next?
Right. They can just keep going until someone stops them.
So, it's fascinating. The market's been insane, right? The last 24 hours, just trying to tell people they want to listen. I was communicating and let him know like, hey, stock's about to be a yo-yo again, and those kind of things. So, I mean, you're an investor, how are you looking at, the general landscape?
It's funny because when people hear the word investor, they automatically think paper assets. They think stock market. And some people just don't even really think about the stock market. They just think about the Dow Jones. Like, oh, the market's up, the market's down. Okay, they're talking about 30 different companies. As an investor, I don't really keep a lot of my portfolio in paper assets. I put it into real estate. I put it into physical silver. I put it into other things that are not going to fluctuate with the changes of war or the changes of the stock market crash. So, I like to hedge my bets. I've been investing in real estate and silver for many years. And so if the stock market goes up or down, it doesn't really affect me too much. I mean, I know silver's up to 25 today, and I've bought silver for much cheaper than that. So, I know my real estate's going to go up in value. It's going to go up in equity. There's going to continue to be rent coming in, and I know that there's going to continue to be a profit on a flip. So I'm not so concerned with paper assets at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, like when I first met you, you were transitioning between, careers. And were you in the jewelry business? I'm trying to remember when I first met you.
Yeah, so I remember, let's see, I think it was around 2017, 18. I think it was 2018. And by that point, I had been in the jewelry industry for almost 25 years. The
Mhm.
first 20 years of that, I had spent running very high-end luxury stores, including 3 flagships on Madison Avenue in New York City. And at that point, I had already been through a divorce. I had 3 young children. I was trying to find a way desperately to get out of retail. I'd spent 20 years running stores and I wanted out. I was spending nights and weekends working in stores. I was commuting 2 hours into New York City. Every holiday, I'd be that guy that would get up early on a Friday after Thanksgiving and go into my store. And so I wanted out. And when I met you, it's because I had been following some of the stuff on social, following some of the trips you had been doing and some of the properties you had bought at auction. And I met you and unfortunately also your brother at one of the auction trips in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I find that, people that have been in your position, right? If there's any way to mute the dings, that would be amazing. I find people in your position over the years, right, that are grind, work hard, work their absolute butts off. Like one of the first things you said when you jumped on today is like, I've been up since 5 a.m., right? I find that people that get into that retail grind, I find that it's hard for them to even have the bandwidth to think outside of their day-to-day because their day-to-day is so intense and overwhelming over their whole life. And I know Dory, my brother Dory, came from that world, a different industry, but still the same retail world. And it's tough. It's tough when you're trying to, establish a family, you're trying to establish a life, you're trying to build a foundation, you're trying to build wealth. And so when you came to us, financially, you weren't in, desperate places, but you weren't in a great place, by any means at all. So, talk to me a little bit about, that leap of faith, with us and because you're in a, really pretty good financial place now. So kind of just share everybody with that journey a little bit.
I imagine I was probably at the point that a lot of people in America are at. They're working their job, they're living paycheck to paycheck, they're struggling to get by. They've got their mortgage or their rent and they're paying their car payment and their bills and whatever it may be. And I was in that position. I think in my early 20s, throwing a little bit of money into my 401k, and I had been watching you guys for probably a few years. And when I went on that trip, I got that trip in Philadelphia where we analyzed, I don't know, maybe 100 properties, and we went to visit 50 of them and walked the properties and peeked our eyes through the doors and peeked into the windows, decided what the repairs would be, decided what the valuation might be, if it were fixed up, the after repair value, and then actually analyzed it and went to the auction and bid on them. And seeing that process, seeing how it is all done, and more importantly, seeing you and Dory, that's what really turned it around for me. Because, in the retail world, especially in luxury goods and jewelry and watches, you meet a lot of people. You meet a lot of people who are wealthy. You meet a lot of CEOs, celebrities. I went to a lot of black tie affairs. I got a pretty good idea of how to read someone. And just sitting down at lunch with you and Dory after going through this process and just seeing how genuine you were and how authentic and how real and how you really came across with like a servant heart to teach people how to do this. That's what really impressed me. And so, I was not in a financial position where I could just say, hey, I'm going to join the inner circle. I'm going to go bid on properties, because I couldn't do it all myself. But I did figure out a way that I wanted it badly enough that I would take my 401k money, put it in a self-directed IRA, and transition that to help invest into the REIT.
I mean, explain that to people a little bit, because I think, as we explore wealth and different things, people don't understand, all of the different aspects of what they can and they can't do, what's available to them out there when it comes to wealth and it comes to investing and stuff. So, take us through that a little bit.
So like I said, I was probably, just living paycheck to paycheck. I had my house, I had my mortgage, I had all my bills. I didn't have money put aside necessarily to invest. In other words, what I wanted to do is I wanted to buy properties, I wanted to flip them, I wanted to rehab them, I wanted to have, hire contractors, but I didn't have that set aside. What you guys provide is a way to do that. So I had money sitting in a 401k. Now, when it's in a 401k, those advisors, they decide what to do. They say, I'm going to put it in this, S&P 500 fund, or I'm going to put it in this, mutual fund that charges fees. And at the end of the year, maybe your portfolio went up 10%, but then if you look at all the fees, all those fees are eating away at your returns. So I started to learn a lot about financial education. And I'm going back, even 10 years ago, reading books and trying to find out how the wealthy did it and what did they do to create wealth. Well, I've never heard of anybody except maybe Dave Ramsey, who really says put money in a 401k or a mutual fund. But I've never heard of anybody who retired wealthy because they had a Fidelity 401k. So I decided, after doing a lot of research, that the way to do it was to pull that out and put it into a self-directed IRA. So I rolled it over, and in a self-directed IRA, you can tell the custodian where to invest. Now, maybe you want to have them invest it in paper assets, in a company or a fund or a REIT or in something else or in precious metals. And so after doing my due diligence, I looked at a lot of different companies, a lot of different investments, doing things with developers or realtors or builders. And I decided to take my 401k money, put it into a self-directed IRA with one of the big custodians. Then from there, I directed it towards you guys to invest with you. And I've been extremely happy since then. It's done very well for me.
Well, cool, man. I like to hear someone like who's not a, like you're not a pitch, you have a career, a job, a life, you're investing, and you've been through this journey from where you were to where you are today. And I like to hear that in your words, because I think, it's one thing when other people tell you about stuff. It's another thing when someone talks you through their experience, of what they've been through when it comes to as they're doing these different things. So, talk to me a little bit about, you're self-employed, right? And why you're self-employed and how that affects you financially and kind of some of that journey, for you and the choices behind that.
So this is interesting. So really in 2020, right before the pandemic and right before, everything shut down, I was distributing 3 brands of watches. I was working for a company as a 1099 and distributing 3 brands of watches to jewelry stores all up and down the Eastern United States. I covered 25 states. Half the US was my territory. Also, right before the pandemic, I had an agreement with a diamond company, and I was distributing loose diamonds to about 110 jewelry stores in the Northeast. I literally would walk around with loose diamonds in my backpack. It was actually kind of dangerous. So the pandemic hits, everything shuts down. I get a phone call from one of the companies saying, hey, all the stores are closed. Nobody's paying their bills. Nobody's returning the merchandise. And we have millions of dollars of invoices, millions of dollars of merchandise coming in. We have to separate our agreement. It's like, okay, no problem. I had multiple streams. The very next day, 24 hours later, I got a call from the other company. Same thing. Kevin, all the stores are closed. Nobody's paying their bills. The stores don't even know how to make sales. They don't have customers. We have to separate our agreement. And so here I was, probably 3 months without income because I realized that my income was dependent upon jewelry stores making sales. And so I decided to look at different industries. And after 25 years of being in the watch and jewelry business, at the top of my game on Madison Avenue, I said, okay, let's look around and see what's happening. Now, if you remember, the government was shutting everybody down except what they called essential. And those essential businesses were like, food and pharmaceuticals and things like that. And I didn't want to work for a pharmaceutical business or a food company.
Hey, our investment fund was seen as an essential, even though I didn't understand that. But our education company was non-essential, which kind of blew my mind because I thought education was more essential. But keep on going.
So around May of 2020, I made a career shift and went into the home improvement business. Now, why would you do that? Well, it was considered essential. We still didn't know what was going to happen, but I traded.
Did you do that because you had to do something?
Had to do something. Look, I got 3 kids, and even though I'm divorced and my kids don't live with me, I have responsibilities. And so home improvement was something I'd been interested in from the eyes of an investor who wanted to invest in real estate. I wanted to learn more about this because, I'd been involved in some rehabs, saw how difficult it was to do my own thing or hire contractors. I'd been involved with other real estate investors on, fix and flips and wholesaling and buying rentals. So I said, let me do this full time. This is my career now. And I went to work for a company that does windows and doors, did exceptionally well in the first 12 months. I sold $3.5 million, but really got to understand a little bit about the rehab process, what the crews do and the work required, from manufacturing to installation. Then I went one step further and took that information and trained salespeople and now opened up a solar business. Because if we're talking energy efficiency, people are looking to lower their bills. And how do they do that? Well, there's different ways of making a rehab, energy efficient.
It's
So
funny
now
how conversations spark conversations, right? So,
Sure.
one of the things we're looking at is, so we've been looking at, some bigger different farms, right? As an investment vehicle. And so one of the farms we were looking at has no power to it, right? And so I was talking about, well, how do we play a bigger game, right? And I think one of the things in my journey of wealth, people don't understand playing a bigger game. They don't understand taking yourself through multiple different levels, right? And I'll give you kind of an example. So we were on the phone with Facebook this last week. We do advertising, spend a lot of money on advertising with Facebook, right? And we're exploring deeply the research behind investing in the metaverse, right? And I said, while we're on the phone talking to him about advertising, they're like, is there anything else you can do for us? I said, well, you guys have spent $22 billion building your metaverse. Do you have a metaverse team that I can jump on the phone and talk about advertising and talk about investing in the metaverse, and what does that look like? And they said yes, right? And so, I'm gonna have a pretty good conversation, next week with some people, from Facebook about their metaverse and about things and exploring their metaverse and stuff. But it's that one step deeper, right? And so I start thinking about you with solar panels, and I also think, you know how to sell, right? And so now one of the things I love to do for Inner Circle members is, when I get a chance to talk with them, is to say, hey, but what about solar contracts for solar fields between like counties and independent, I guess you would call it electricity distributors, right? And so that would be, something pretty cool if you're working in the solar industry, and you can negotiate those kind of deals or those kind of contracts, and then we can go buy the farms to match and put solar fields, right? And I've seen solar fields out there while I've been looking at farms. So obviously we know, if you've ever been between California and Vegas, you guys see the largest solar field I've ever seen. I'm sure there's bigger ones. So just kind of a fascinating food for thought pin to, stick in your hat for another conversation for us. But I think when you're building wealth, you have to think to that deep next level connectivity, that next level synergy and stuff. I think that'd be pretty cool to explore that. What do you think, Kevin?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think a couple of years ago, someone who won't be named said there'd be a computer in every house, and people laughed at them. And now I think, someone's going to say, hey, every house, or at least half the houses, will be able to generate their own power. That's solar. But, you got to think a little bit more deeper than that. What's the reason behind it? Is it because we are beholden to monopolies out there, whether it's a pharmaceutical monopoly, an energy monopoly, a food monopoly? We have to think about things long term. And as investors, I'm always looking at what's the thing that's coming up. What will people need? Not necessarily what they want, but what will they need to help them be better?
Yeah, I'm always looking for something similar, in the sense is like, I want to see what, the way the wind is blowing, but before it actually blows. And that's one of the reasons why, we're doing the research into the metaverse stuff, is because, if I could go back and look at crypto, 9 years ago, how many of us would own, 1,000 Bitcoins today, right? All of us. And so, I want to be ahead of, if that's there. And then if I decide not to do it, then I've made a educated, conscious choice not to do it. Right. But reality is back then, when it came to crypto, it was a thing where I was like, I don't know. And I'm a real estate investor, and I'm going to stay away from what I don't know. And there's a large part of me that still has that exact philosophy, is I stay away from what I don't know. But there's nothing wrong with getting to know or knowing more stuff. And I think that's that constant exploration of wealth and stuff for you, as you're on, your continuous journey. Like, what are you exploring now? How do you see, your investing? How do you see your world now? It's funny because you went through a terrible time in 2020, but I know, just from your investing with us, you're obviously doing a lot better, at the beginning of 2022 than you were in 2020.
Well, yeah, certainly just after our Inner Circle retreat we had in Las Vegas recently, I just did 4 deals with you guys. So, I'm fortunate to be in that position.
I know you wanted to do 5, but
That's okay. I was very quick on the analysis, and I was trying to get all the deals submitted as quickly as I could to see how many I could get, But yeah, I'm fortunate that way. I can say that I honestly don't live paycheck to paycheck anymore. And as not just a real estate investor, but an investor in general, I'm looking for multiple streams of income.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to paraphrase my father a little bit here. When I was younger, my father had his own business and he did very well. We had a pretty good living growing up. And I remember asking him in the car ride once saying, Dad, do you want to be rich and famous? And I don't know his exact answer, but his answer was no. I don't want to be rich and famous. I go, why not? Because I want to be like Sam Walton. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I want to be wealthy and anonymous. And so my mentality thinking was, I'm never going to get wealthy.
Well, that's just great. We got you on the podcast. We keep you anonymous.
Yeah. So the anonymity is not going to be there. But the point was, I don't want to be the NBA star who buys a $10 million home and 3 years later he's broke. I'd rather live under the radar, like you see in The Millionaire Next Door. I don't buy new cars. I bought a 2015 car, right? And I'm investing. I'm taking my money, investing it with you guys. I'm investing in precious metals. I have an e-commerce business. I have a solar business. I'm looking to build multiple streams of income, and I'm teaching other people how to do it too. Because, if they're stuck in a job for 40 years, then what? They retire, they take their 401k. Most people die in a couple of years after they retire. What kind of life is that? Life should be enjoyed and lived.
It does have to be enjoyed and lived. Like when I look at life or business and I start to look at, all of the business I ran, I remember there was a time, I was running 11 different businesses at once, and every single one of them was doing anywhere from 100,000 to $1 million in revenue. And, I started to hit some different ceilings, and I was always about trying to figure out what were the exchanges. I was always looking at like, what's the exchange? What's the time exchange? What's the drama exchange? What's the money exchange? What's the effort exchange? Right. And all of these things that, like, when I'm evaluating like where I'm going to put my time and effort, it's all into the exchanges. And so I look at, and I try to evaluate everything when I make decisions. Like a great example is like, I really believe that, there's a time where we could build a RADD university, for wealth. But at the same time, I look at the exchanges within our business. And, I told our team yesterday, like, we're going to put this on the back burner for 6 months before we discuss it again, because the exchange didn't make great sense. And so kind of like what you're talking about, you're running multiple streams of income and you're evaluating the exchanges. And so if I can, walk you through, the different evaluation on the different multiple streams of income, there's a lot to pay attention to. There's a lot to watch for. What I see when you get into those multiple streams of income, you'll end up having one that takes up more time and more effort and makes less money. You'll have one that's making great money that carries more drama with it. And then you'll have one that's making money that takes less effort, right? And is less drama. And it's fascinating. Lots of times that's the one that gets ignored, I find, with a lot of multiple stream incomers, more than the other two. And it's kind of fascinating as you go through your time exchange and monitoring your time. I don't know if you've done a time map of your personal time, but it's pretty wicked when you actually do a time map of your personal time, like where you are spending your time, where you're spending your effort, where you're spending your energy, especially when you're a grinder. And I used to be a grinder for a long time, and I still grind in a lot of ways. There's still a lot of that in me. I mean, I woke up, as a child, I was waking up at 4 a.m. every day doing paper routes, for a decade. And that was, large portion of my childhood nonstop was 4 a.m., 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., 4 or 5 days a week. And then twice a week, it was 4 a.m. to 6 or even 7 a.m. And that was, part of the grind of my childhood. And so, I know what that grind is like. So talk to me a little bit how, you're kind of monitoring your different streams of income and how, you're putting effort, time, energy, or right now, are you just kind of receiving income from the multiple streams and then just, kind of embracing them all because it's, it's a newer thing in your universe, I mean, 2 years is not new, but it's newer, than what it would have been 2 years ago. That's for sure.
Certainly. So here's my answer to this. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of things. But you're right. My primary source of income is from windows and doors. That's what I do a lot of. And that's probably where I spend 8 to 10 hours a day. Now, the good news is I'm increasing my passive income versus my earned income, right? So my
Mhm.
passive income is where RAD comes into play. So I'll take my earned income, invest it into RAD, and so that my real estate earnings, as my real estate earnings continue to increase, that gives me choices. Like, do I really need to be spending so much time on one of these? Do I need to be doing windows and doors 6 days a week, 24/7 kind of thing? Or can I just take that money and invest into real estate and have my real estate give me choices of time? Because we'll never make more time. You
Yeah.
can always make more money, but you can never get the time back. And I'm thinking that, the time I spend, as I said before, I'm a divorced father of three. My time is really valuable with my kids, just like I know is with your sons. And every 2 weeks, I drive 4.5 hours from New Jersey to Massachusetts to spend a weekend with my kids. I don't do work when I do that.
Yeah, my
I
wife's
go
my
see my
wife's out
kids.
of town right now, and I've been, working pretty seriously the last couple of days on some initiatives. And I'm like, tomorrow I'm not working. Tomorrow I'm taking the boys on jet skis. I'm gonna take them out on the ocean. I'm gonna enjoy some time with them, right? And I'm gonna surrender to, life. And it's not when you have that natural hard work ethic kind of DNA in you. And I was talking to someone the other day and they said, no, I never felt any guilty at all when I stopped, when I don't work as hard, or I take time off and different things. I'm like, really? That must feel good. Cause for a long time when I would take time off, I'd almost feel like this weird sense of laziness, this weird
Mhm.
sense of guilt. And
I felt that.
I don't have that anymore, but there was a time in my life when I used to kind of go through that time off, kind of paradigm as I go through, personal, mental evolutions.
Certainly. I mean, and every Saturday when I go up to Massachusetts, I sometimes have like a conference call in the morning for half an hour. And that matter of fact, this Saturday, I'll be leading my team on a training for 30 minutes, coaching them. And then I'm like, you know what? Shut off the brain, get in the car, go see the kids, and just go, do video games, go axe throwing, go take them to archery, go see a movie. It's father time, right? And
I
it's
think it's
important to me.
I think it's fascinating because you're talking about Saturdays not working, right? And a lot of people are thinking about taking a vacation. So it's interesting. The mental pop is, and if I can pop you mentally a little bit, the mental pop is when you take that decision and you put the full energy in it, and it's hard to do. There's transitions, there's money that's coming in and different things, and it's about figuring out how and finding the exchange of the how. But when the time lapse shifts more to the passive income versus the time lapse that shifts to active income, and the mental energy that goes into it, there's crazy paradigms that begin to change and shift, right? And it's fascinating when you get to that place. Like right now, I'm at a place now. If I go spend an hour in a deprivation tank, right, that's more valuable to me than 8 hours, or 12 hours of active working. And what it does, mentally. Like right now, if I don't make 10,000, and maybe I need to reevaluate the numbers. We've grown a lot as a company, but a year ago, I used to say, if the mental work that I'm doing is at $10,000 an hour, then somebody's going to lose their job, right? Somebody's going to get laid off, or there's a team or an employee or a person, something's not right. And so I have to think and lift my mindset that way. But then there's your goals, right? So our goals is to become $1 billion, an asset is the next financial, milestone as we go through the longer term milestones. And so now I have to start thinking, well, what's that come back to? I have to have mental capacity. Now I've let go of that dollar per thinking per hour kind of thing a long time ago, but it's still to create understanding as people are on this journey, how you start thinking the way. And the mental pop is, if you're working towards the passive income, but you're doing active income, right? How do we start to adjust and create more leverage and more activity, right? With your passive income. And so, it's definitely, food for thought, as you go forward and stuff, and you start to dive deeper. For you right now, you have passive income working for you. What's your, what's the next, 2 years, 3 years, couple of years for you look like? Like, what are the goals? What are the active activities?
Well, that's actually an easy question to answer because I write these down all the time. So within 3 years, I won't be in New Jersey. I'm in New Jersey now because when I came here in 2020 to get into the home improvement business, that's where the opportunity was.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not going to be forever. I would like to go to a non-state income tax state like Florida or Texas or maybe Tennessee. That being said, my kids are all in high school, so I won't move until they graduate high school. I want to have maybe multiple residences, so I can have one near my kids and one where they can come visit, say on summer vacations. I would also say that the active income will eventually go away. It's not worth my time to do that, whereas I can invest my time building streams of either internet income or passive income through real estate. My goal is to have a portfolio and have that portfolio of real estate, so be my lifestyle per se. I don't have to be wealthy. I just need to have enough that it replaces my active income. So I want my time back.
Yeah,
It's not about the money.
Owning your time is interesting, and it feels really good when you get back to a place where the things that work for you, right? The things that work towards, you being able to be financially free. And some people, are born into money and they're financially free. I was born poor, and so, I understand the paradigm and the difference between the two. As you become more free, what are your hobbies? What are your fascinations? What are you most into? And where do you think, a lot more of your energy and time will go into?
Well, it's a great question. And I'll tell you why I frame it this way. My mother died when I was 19. My brothers were very young at the time. And then my father died when I was about 30. And I had just gotten engaged. My daughter was on the way. So I know my mortality is limited. We can't, pick and choose the time of our passing. So my hobby is, number one, is to be a great father. Number one is to instill in my kids.
Bro, I'm making 200. Just to be clear, I'm making 200. So, well,
I want to make sure that I give them the gift of knowledge and wisdom and lessons before that time comes, whenever that time is. Now, in addition to that, my hobbies, the things what I would do that if I didn't have to work, I would be very active in martial arts. I really enjoyed martial arts as a kid. I played Little League Baseball. I know you were a baseball coach. And I played baseball for 8 years, and I loved it. Probably my most fun sport. I really enjoyed training in martial arts. I did it on and off for about 10 years in multiple disciplines. I also have a cabin up in the woods in Pennsylvania on 80 acres around a lake. Very peaceful place to go. I would spend summers there at my grandparents. And, I'd like to introduce that to my kids. I have to rebuild a house up there before I do that. And so there's things I want to do, including travel. Now, when I traveled for 5 years selling to watch stores, that wasn't fun travel. That was business travel. Going to airports every morning at 5:30 in the morning and, being in different airports every day. I'd like to go take my kids on a, cross-country trip, see all the state parks, maybe buy an RV, go to the Grand Canyon, just travel for 3 months, but I need to have the time to do that. Because once you get the money, if the money is all earned from active income, you won't have the time. And so there's a lot to do before my time passes. And hopefully, not only will my kids learn it so that they don't have to go through the same kind of struggle, although I think struggles are good for people's character, I want to be able to leave them something that's not money. I want to leave them lessons, wisdom, and intelligence to live their life.
Well, leave them some hard, tangible assets too. It's always a good
a rental portfolio.
Yeah, it's a good thing. My kids already, have, money. I don't know where my son Micah always finds money. I don't know, like he finds it on the street, he finds it in the house, finds it on the couch cushions. He's 5 years old and he gives me money like on a weekly basis to go invest. And it's fascinating because we haven't done allowances with them yet. Maybe we should. They're 5 and 6. But even when they have money, they do the tithing, investing, saving, stuff. And it's just fascinating to watch them, because when I was growing up, there was no conversations about money other than the fact that, go work and then give the money to my parents was kind of the conversation when I was a kid. I don't think kids today have that same, give the money to parent mentality, but maybe they do. Maybe they do. For you, I know you're big into survival. I know you're big into, the journey of America being a great country. But I also know that we have threats, that exist in this world. And so how do you balance that? Like you're on this journey, this pursuit of wealth. You're on this journey where you're making good income, you're working passive versus active income, but you're a strong believer in being prepared, being ready for the worst case scenarios. And some people be like, well, if the worst case scenario is going to happen, what's the point of building wealth? Because, those things will disappear. So, some of those things, are interesting as you talk through different conversations. So talk me through a little bit, kind of how you balance being prepared for, in the simplest form, a horrific natural disaster. And it's more complicated form, Russia invades Ukraine and sets off World War III. So, those are pretty insane things, but both are, within the realm of possibilities in our world.
Certainly. And look, let's start at the simple scale, right? People have a spare tire in their car. Why? So, I go one step further. In my car, I may have something else. I have jumper cables. I have a reflectorized triangle. I have a flare. I maybe have some protein bars and some Mylar blankets. What if I get stuck on the side of the road in a snowstorm? Maybe I need, something warm to wear. That's just being prepared.
I bet you got more than that in there.
Probably. I might send you a video later about it. But then you take it one step further. When there were hurricanes in New York City during Hurricane Sandy, I was living in Queens at the time and working in Manhattan. Hurricane Sandy hit. My kids were in New Jersey, and there was no gasoline for 3 weeks. Nothing. There was lines. I took pictures. 75 people online with gas cans. 100 cars waiting on the street. Couldn't get gas. And so I couldn't even get to my kids. And my kids were 30 miles away, but I had to cross 2 bridges to get there, and I needed a vehicle, and I couldn't do it. And as a father, that freaked me out. So I even remember once within 3 weeks, I had to take a subway to a bus station, take the bus to New Jersey, get my kids, put them back on a bus, and come back to New York City, for 24 hours, whatever it was. So I started thinking, it was 2015, I left New York City. And I started thinking further. Now, what happens, during a snowstorm, during a blizzard? We get a lot of nor'easters up here in the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
Power goes out for a couple days.
And it could be nothing one year and a complete catastrophe the next year. Yeah,
absolutely. So now, people don't always think about this, but when there's a hurricane, people run out to the stores. Look what happened when the pandemic happened. You couldn't find toilet paper I don't know why people hoarded toilet paper, but the point is people rush to the stores and grab all the sorts of supplies they can last minute. Why go through that stress? So I started building up things like, having a extra couple cans of food when I go shopping. And I started building up my pantry. I started having things that were good for 3 or 4 months, and I started rotating it. Then I started having extra supplies laying around. Now, I'm not talking about paper towels, but I'm talking about other things. I have water containers. I have something I can put in my bathtub. If there's a hurricane, the water is no longer drinkable, so you can store water. Then, like you said, what goes further than that? Power grid failure. I've seen that in the Northeast. Natural disasters. What happens?
Was a cyber attack, right? A few years ago or 2 years ago.
The whole Northeast went dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I was divorced. My kids were living in my old parents' house. They had no power for, I think, 4 days, and it was wintertime. Trees were down. So I'm thinking something simple, like just having wood for the fireplace. Now let's go a little step further.
The craziest one I ever went through was the floods. I want to say it was floods of '93. I'm guessing was in the Midwest. And essentially there was water covered the high school that I eventually went to. I think it was maybe 7th or 8th grade. The high school I was going to go to was literally halfway up the second story. Which is a good 15 to 20 feet
Wow.
above. And a lot of the city was devastated, and they had to fly in water, from helicopters. They had to boat things in, and it was pretty bad. Creeks turned into the Mississippi. It was pretty awful. And I just remember, just people, being desperate, and you wouldn't think that, you're going to have, a flood in the Midwest that's going to cause, complete, disaster. And I think the other thing, we had ice storms where power would go out and would shut everything down for days. But back then people were more prepared than they are today, just flat out. I knew, we had neighbors, we had, relatives, we, even ourselves, we had more, that was there, even though we were really poor. So it's fascinating.
I wonder, I appreciate it now, right? But this house I have up in the Pennsylvania mountains, my grandparents had, a fully stocked firewood shed. They had hand tools just in case needed. They had lanterns and candles and a wood burning stove just in case. So now, let's look at some of the threats that are occurring now. Do we think the US dollar is going to last in its current condition with hyperinflation and QE 1, 2, 3 and infinity, and the Fed printing money like crazy? And it's not really money, it's currency, but every fiat currency system has failed in history. You go back to the Greeks, the Romans, they've all failed.
People, everyday people don't know what fiat currency is. Explain that to them.
So a fiat currency is when the government says, okay, whatever whatever resource we're using as money, we're going to replace that by executive decision. And that executive decision is a fiat. So they just say, by the order of this fiat, we are now making this piece of paper, give it some sort of value.
But the gold, I mean, back, in Fort Knox backs the American dollar, right?
It did until 1971, thanks to Nixon. So when Nixon took us off the gold standard, now that piece of paper in our wallet is just backed by the good old faith and the trust of the US government. And we all know that faith and trust can erode over time. So what the dollar buys now is not what it bought in 1971.
It's interesting because you look at, history of currency and money and I had Rachel Neighbors on, and we're talking about, history of money, and she's, has a pretty good understanding of wealth and pretty good understanding of crypto and other things. And she felt pretty strongly, we felt pretty strongly that the crypto was going to become an American currency. There's going to be a cryptocurrency come, we think, released by our government someday. But then I sit here and I deal with the amazing, incredible, good people at the SEC who do their best to protect investors and to make sure that we stay on pace, the way, doing investing and receiving investors the right way. But I see them, they're working diligently to keep up with the crypto world. And to think that our Fed is somehow going to do a cryptocurrency, it's hard to imagine because, it's really hard for government and legislature to keep up with technology. It's not, an individual person's fault. It's just the speed at which technology goes past what a government policy or regulation or can do is kind of tumultuous.
Yeah, certainly. And look, crypto, obviously people measure things against Bitcoin, but all these other altcoins, whether it's Ethereum or something else, there is value there. People are trading it. People are mining it. Things are trading back and forth. And so, as a means of exchange, if it's being used, it's being used. And so if the US dollar in its current situation collapses, then what? My fear, and I hope this never happens, but my fear is we're going to have a 3-day weekend, like a Memorial Day weekend. And on Friday afternoon, the stock market's going to close. We're going to go into our holiday weekend, and all of a sudden there's going to be something. The bank shut down. It'll be like Cyprus. They freeze accounts like they did in Canada. And now all of a sudden you can't get your money. And then you go back on Tuesday because they're closed on Monday. And all of a sudden your account's frozen. Then what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I've always, I believe in buying real estate because I believe that no matter what happens in the universe, money goes up, money goes down, economy goes up, economy goes down. People always need a place to do business. People always need a place to live. And that's always housed by real estate. And so for me, I've always believed that no matter what happens in the world, by owning real estate and by owning a company that owns real estate, right? It's one of the better ways for us to safeguard, our future when it comes to, even in the worst economic situations. I also kind of believe that, when foreign powers are buying American real estate and buying American businesses, I think that's dangerous for us as a country. And it's not my favorite thing. We do have foreign investors, and I don't, I will never say that, we don't have, any foreign investors who invest with us, but those foreign investors are still investing in our company, which is an American company. And then our company is also buying American real estate. And so it's still an American company owning American real estate. And so for me, I've always thought of, 99% of our investors, being Americans buying back, America, and buying it away from, the foreign interests that, are allowed by our government to have interest, in America in ways that I don't think is, necessarily right. And it's one thing for an individual person to buy a piece of property who maybe has dual citizenship and those kind of things. It's another thing for a major billion-dollar corporation to buy real estate in America or buy businesses in America and take away American assets. So something, we love the world, every country's in it, to win it for together for the universe, I think is naivety, in my opinion. Because if you've been alive long enough, there are people in the world who want to do good and believe in doing good and believe in helping their neighbor and believe in being a good neighbor. But there's just as many, or there's enough of the people in the world who believe the opposite. And so, to live in any other, belief is, I personally think, it's a fantasy.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, look, I sent you that article the other day where, a foreign company was buying up a big swath of the Dakotas to produce corn and other materials related to corn. We know that farmland in Texas has been purchased by foreign powers, right? We know that big parts of California have been bought too.
And when foreign powers own farmland in America, what does that mean? What does that say? What it says to me is that now the American food supply is controlled by a foreign power. And if American food supply is controlled by a foreign power, that puts all of us at risk at any point in time. And it puts us at risk in a lot of different other ways. And so when I look at, you can go deep down the conspiracy theory and say COVID was intentional and done by a foreign power, right? But you can say that maybe, and that's fascinating. When you think of a lot of things in the world, when people describe things, lots of times I say maybe. But if it was, what other potential threats, do we face that we don't know about, or we're not aware of in different ways? And if, there are foreign powers that have written plans to overthrow capitalism. And if they have those written plans, if they have those manifestos, how do we continue to, allow them to have influence within our country? I'm not saying we need to go to war with them. I'm not saying we need to attack them, but to allow them to continue to take controlling interest and continue to have influence within our country, doesn't make sense. And I know, we're about exploring wealth here, but what happens when our wealth is leaving our nation?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And that's why I love that you guys were doing the American Survival Project. Have something where you're growing your own food, you have income producing farms, take back some of the controls so you're no longer at the disposal and under control of a foreign power growing our food supply or our pharmaceutical supply or any other supply. We need to be independent, not just energy independent, but food independent, water independent, land independent, currency independent. And it's a scary thought to think that, yes, we are a melting pot. And look, my mother came from the Philippines, so I'm a descendant of an immigrant. Mm-hmm. But there's, something different between immigration and foreign powers taking control of certain aspects of the American culture.
Yeah. And I'm, it's hard. It's always hard politically because people fall on different sides of fences all the time. And so, but I've always been a huge believer in proper immigration, into the United States. And I also believe that when people need help, you help them. Right. But there's a difference between that and allowing, foreign multi-billion-dollar conglomerations that are backed or run by governments to, take influence. And so, there's good, and then there's, protection, and it's all, there's a unique dynamic balance to have it done the right way. One of the things I love to do, Kevin, is we have a lot of, people watching, that are, live. I know we had other Inner Circle members who, jump on to hear these podcasts and things. And I just kind of want to take a moment to see, if some of them have any engagement or questions they want to ask you. Sometimes we have people pre-submit questions. Do we have any pre-submitted questions for this one?
I do have some questions, but I have some questions in the chat.
All right, let's start with the chat.
Okay, so in the chat, Felipe asked.
By the way, everybody, this is Zach Hernandez. He's our producer, for our RADcast podcast. And he's been doing an incredible job, but I've never properly introduced him, to all of you, and you suddenly hear his voice. We'll flip the camera around, but if you go on the website, you can see his pretty face. At least his wife believes he's pretty, and only my wife believes I'm pretty. So, but Zach, go ahead.
So a question from Felipe. It says, what made you join RADD Diversified and invest in the real estate deals? In other words, what made you decide going to join and invest with them?
Yeah. So the question from Felipe was just kind of like, I'm just going to paraphrase Felipe, your trigger, right? When you observed us for years, right? Before you got involved. And, there was a day and there was a time when you pulled the trigger, when you said, okay, all right, it's time. So what was that trigger for you? What was that moment?
There was two things, the really defining moments. So once again, I had been in the retail world for a long time, and really because I had lost my mother at an early age, I dropped out of college and did not pursue my dreams of going into the military, becoming an attorney. So I remember sitting in one of my stores. It was the week of Christmas, and it was like maybe the Thursday night before Christmas or the Friday before Christmas weekend. And I'm in my store at like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, not seeing my kids right before Christmas. I'm like, this is dumb. I am wasting my life. I'm sitting in a freaking store waiting for someone to come in and buy something when I should be playing with my kids and doing something related to Christmas, right? So I said, I need to find a way out of here. Now, yes, I've been following you guys for a long time. And back then, when it was tax auction investors and I was looking at how to buy things through auction, I had also done some things on my own. Like I had tried to do some wholesaling. I had done some fix and flips. I had tried to do the Kevin way, and the Kevin way wasn't working. So when I found that you guys already had a system, and I've been watching you for years, and I saw your process on that Philadelphia trip, and I saw that you have a whole team of people. You do the contracting, you do the permits, you do the rehabs, you have everything set in place, you do the financing. All you have is you allow people in the inner circle to come in and partner with you. You're going to do all the stuff that would normally take up my time and probably years of learning to get the expertise. And all of a sudden I'm getting a return on my money much quicker than me trying to do something on my own in 5 years.
I had one of those moments too, Kevin. And I think those moments when people look at their lives are critical. I mean, I think they're some of the most important, pivotal moments of your life, right? And I remember mine was New Year's, and I want to say I was 24, and I was New Year's, and I was valeting at a restaurant on New Year's. I'd finished college. I'd coached college baseball for 2 years. But I'd broken up with my high school sweetheart. I was in this perpetual grind. I was a little bit lost, and I was, I had to make money. And I was valeting at a restaurant at New Year's. And I remember seeing these people celebrating their New Year's inside this restaurant. And, it was a pretty influential, group of people and influential, restaurant. I remember just saying, man, this is not my story. This is not my life. And I just remember looking at it in that moment and having the moment of trigger. And there's other moments in my life, but I so vividly remember those people celebrating, and I'm standing outside, and I just, had valeted all of their cars, and I'm getting ready because, not that long after midnight, people are going to start leaving, but just, seeing that and being by myself and realizing this is not the life that I'm going to lead. Right. So to be able to be, one of those avenues for you to step into, your life is, really, it's really a blessing, and I'm very happy to be a part of that for you. Those stories, when it comes to life, and we use the word wealth a lot, but life is, as just as an important word. And so those stories in life, it just all depends on what story you're going to tell. And I know so many people used to tell the 2008 pain story and they hadn't recovered from it, and they don't get through grief. And I've never read 5 stages of grief. You got to, because you got to process through it, and you'll tell a different story when you've processed. And I look at 2020, there's a lot of people, I get emails from time to time from people that are like, I lost my job, or, the income dried up. And now, it's 2022 and they're still living that same nightmare. And I see that, you went into that nightmare for a few months, but then you stepped out of it and you stepped into a new life and a new world, and crazy mad respect for it. But so when people are in that, they're in that stuck phase, it's mind blowing how difficult the next step is. And I think the 5 stages of grief would be one of my huge pieces of advice for people. But my other piece of advice would be rewrite the story. Write the story of what you choose and what your empowerment is. Don't write the story of the victim, even if you were a victim, right? Because to continue to live in the victim story is not a life that I think anybody in the world would want to choose. But let's jump into the next question.
Another question is, hi Kevin, the person standing in 2020 shoes, what one change or first step would you advise them?
Could you guys hear that on the Zoom, or do I need to repeat it?
I couldn't hear it all.
So he said, hey, Kevin, what one change was the person in the 2020 shoes, right? What would the person today give that person? What advice would you give yourself or give that person that you were in 2020? What would be the one thing, what would be the advice you'd give yourself?
It's a great question. The answer is let go and trust God. So let me explain that. 25 years I spent in the watch and jewelry industry. 25 years, that was my identity. In other words, I was the watch and jewelry industry. I was well known in the business. I worked on Madison Avenue. I had run a store that was one of 435 stores in the world. And I not only became number one in the United States, I actually started to beat Paris, which had never happened before for this brand. And there were 2 stores in Hong Kong I couldn't catch because it was a very different business model. But for me, my identity was watch and jewelry. And I had to let go of that and say, okay, Kevin, you're at a pivotal turn in your life. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to hold on to your identity of a watch and jewelry guy? Or are you going to choose to do what's right for your family and do what's right for your life? Step into your power and go look for something. Yeah, it's scary, but try something new. I took a job at 100% commission, no salary, tried something new, and it worked out because I was driven to do it. Now, so my advice to anybody is be able to let go, trust in yourself, trust in God, and do something else that's different.
Yeah, letting go is definitely a tangible, real trait for people that is very it can be very challenging. And I always say, to be a true entrepreneur, you have to move into the unknown. It's the only way to be a real entrepreneur. And in order to do that, you've got to let go and trust, and you got to surrender on the result, and be in the moment. I used to struggle with that because a couple of times in my life when I was younger, I'd worked to the absolute maximum capacity of my abilities and then burn out or failed. And so, once I became an entrepreneur, it was something that I had to learn or I had to persevere through, and push through. But when you think you're persevering through or pushing through, you're almost building a barrier or a wall there. When you realize that those things that you believe you're pushing through or you're trying to persevere through don't exist, then it becomes, simpler and easier. And what I mean by they don't exist is they've already happened. They're not an actual reality, right? Things in the past aren't a current reality. They're just the past. And so those are things. It doesn't mean that the past isn't a part of who you are today, or the past isn't, relevant information today, but it's not real anymore. It's gone. And that's a fascinating thing for people, and the future doesn't exist yet. So it's the reality. And I know we all say, the be present teaching, but, as you get deeper into that and understand it more, that mental processing is a different existence, And I have never found a way to do it other than trusting God. Others may find ways to do it, but for me, it's to let go of those other 2 things is the only way I've ever been able to do it. So go ahead, Zach. Another question.
This is a question for you, Dutch. It's a question for Dutch. Except for foreign investors, is there any other big institutional investors like Vanguard or BlackRock, etc., that own part of RADD Diversified or the REIT?
Hey, that's a really great question. The question is, it's a question for me. Besides, foreign investors, are there any other, major institutional that companies that own a large part of RADD or, a good chunk of RADD or those kind of things? So let me be crystal clear. We have some foreign investors. They do not own a large chunk or a large portion of RADD, right? We have some Canadian investors. We have, a decent amount of Brazilian investors for whatever reason, and we have a handful of Chinese investors. But I'd say they're 1% of the total investors, with RADD. I fascinated and watch what that experience is like. Now, the question about big institutions investing in RADD and big institutions being a part of RADD, the answer is no. We don't have any major institutions or organizations that I'm aware of that have any influence or any major investments with RADD. So hopefully that answers that. Next question.
This is a question for Kevin. What books are you reading right now? What books would you recommend?
Hey, Kevin, just give your books. That's what they're asking. What now? What in the past? Give us. Don't give us the 127,000 library, but give us the 1 through 5.
I'll keep it simple. So, I do have probably 500 to 1,000 books, but the ones I recommend to everybody. So Millionaire Next Door tells you how people became millionaires, and it wasn't through, extravagant things. It was by being smart with their money. Obviously, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that's why, you would need to do something and move out of the employee quadrant and move into doing something else. And then the third one that's always been my favorite is the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, right? And each one of those 7 habits are important, right? I don't want to go through them all, but let's just say begin with the end in mind. What is it you really want? Do you want to be an employee for 40 years or 50 years and die broke? Then by all means, if that's what you want, then do it. I didn't want that.
I can never be thankful enough to a marketing professor in college that required the 7 habits of highly effective people. And it kind of blows my mind that even today, 22 years later, that how true that book's hold. And probably I need to put that on my, reread list, which I've always been a person who hates to rewatch a movie, rewatch a TV show, reread a book, but that's one of the ones that I think I have to. It's up there with 4 Agreements for me, for sure. So what else?
That's pretty much so. Okay, so tell us why you decided to be a part of the American Survivors Project.
So they're asking just a little bit about ASP and your choice to be a part of American Survivalist Project and kind of what that means to you. Feel free to fill us in on that.
Okay, so let me go
Tell
back.
people what American Survivalist Project is, because I don't know how well or deep everybody knows. So
Well, so, and I'll paraphrase a little bit and you can jump in, but for me, the American Survivalist Project was this opportunity where, RADD as a REIT was diversifying into other, forms of investments. And so you were looking at back then it was a 454 acre, income producing farm and ranch in Idaho. And I love the idea of it because I'm thinking, okay, great. Not only is it strategically important because a lot of people are moving out of California and Washington and they're moving towards, that area. So I know that real estate was appreciating like crazy, and that particular part of Idaho was probably one of the top 3 growing places in the country. But a place to have not only your own food, but a place to have your own shelter, a place to go. And we're not talking like, oh, I'm going to bug out and hunker down. I'm going to be in the caves and fight like the guys in Afghanistan. But I'm thinking it's a really smart idea to have property that's remote, that's outside of a metropolitan center, that's outside of maybe a natural disaster area, maybe away from the California fault lines. Smart place to have lots of land.
And the California fire lines.
Exactly.
I actually think fire is the greatest natural disaster threat in California. Now that could be partnered with a major earthquake, but maybe it's because I haven't experienced one in the 20 years I was, living in California.
So it's coming eventually. And
yeah.
I have a lot of family in California. I have family from Sacramento all the way down to LA, down to even Carlsbad and San Diego, probably 20 cousins in California. So I go there often and I talk to them often, but I'm like, guys, what's going to happen if, California, forget about the, 11 or 12% state income tax, but some of the policies in California, people are leaving. And I know some very wealthy people who have left California for Texas and Florida. I might be talking to one, but there's a reason that the American Survivalist Project was so attractive to me, because I have land in Pennsylvania, and that land in Pennsylvania, I can't go there year round. It's really cold in the wintertime, right? I can't grow food there, but it is a nice place to go and relax. But to have the idea of having a secondary location or a third location or fourth location where you have, some storage, you have some supplies, you have some food, you have, a camaraderie of people around you who are like-minded, that was very attractive. And not just in terms of my personal safety and security, but in terms of a business model. It's brilliant for a REIT to invest in something like that, because that's what people want. People are looking for that.
Yeah. Awesome, brother. Well, thank you for being on today. You share, a great many values and a great many beliefs that I have. And I hope to continue to, support you and be there, as you continue on your journey and stuff. And I'm so glad to see, I just remember, the Kevin I met in 2018 and I respected him and believed in him. And so I don't mean to, speak anything other than positively, about who you once were. But I also know that the Kevin that I know today has gone through so many evolutions, and it's pretty incredible. And, thank you for letting me, be a part of your journey with that.
Well, thank you, Dutch. I mean, I look up to you. I've learned a lot from you. And over the past few years, I've evolved probably because I wanted to be a part of this community and this group. And so I look forward to many more years together.
All right, brother. Well, it's a wrap. Great job. I mean, that was a really good podcast. I think there's some incredible nuggets and information for people as they review and watch it. And I, love that, what you shared. So appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Dutch. Appreciate you too.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.